Life is sometimes like a river. It seems calm, but it can suddenly crash you against the rocks. My name is Liam. I am 25 years old, and I was born and raised in a small village called Glenmore, nestled among the misty hills of Ireland. Our village was a place of trust, where everyone knew each other and old legends were told. By the fireplace in the evenings, an old wise man named Ewan lived in our village. Ewan didn't just make medicine from herbs. He also knew ancient prayers and protection methods that eased the weight of the soul. He never harmed anyone and used his knowledge only for good. After I returned from the army, I wanted to become his apprentice. Ewan looked deep into my eyes and said, "I will teach you these secrets. Liam, but you must swear an ancient oath never to use this power for dark purposes." At that moment, I didn't understand why this oath was so important, but I accepted. Years passed, and I learned much from Ewan. People would come to us complaining of nightmares, inexplicable weights on their shoulders, and entities they saw in the shadows. Then, my childhood friend Connor decided to marry his great love, Saoirse. Neither of them had fathers, so the entire village took this wedding under its wing. When the wedding day arrived, the village square was decorated with flowers and lanterns. Fiddlers played their most joyful tunes. Everyone was dancing, and ale was flowing. Everything was perfect. However, just as Connor and Saoirse were about to exchange their vows, every torch and lantern went out at once. The village was plunged into a darkness deeper than we had ever felt, followed by an ice-cold silence. In Glenmore, it was unheard of for all the lamps and torches to go out at once. The air was dead still that night, without a whisper of wind. When the lights vanished, a brief panic ensued as people stumbled over each other to relight the torches. I rushed to Connor's side, placed my hand on his shoulder, and said, "Steady, friend, we're fixing it." But Connor didn't say a word. He and Saoirse were staring into the void, frozen like statues. Soon the torches flickered back to life, but the joyful atmosphere of the village had been severed as if by a knife. Without a word, Connor took Saoirse by the arm and walked away from the wedding grounds. Everyone was stunned. My mother came to me and said, "Come, Liam, we're going home. The wedding is over." When we got home, I asked her what had happened. She said, according to Moira, Connor's mother, Connor was furious. He took the lights going out on his most sacred day as a dark omen. It made no sense to me that someone as calm as Connor would react so harshly. The next day, I went to see the wise Ewan. I knocked, but no one answered. A weary voice from inside said, "Liam, the key is under the flower pot. Come in." When I entered, I found Ewan in bed, shivering. "Master, what happened to you?" I asked. "I don't know, lad. Since last night, an indescribable weight has settled upon me," he replied. Even in that state, he continued to teach me the secrets of ancient runes and protection prayers. He warned me sternly that in the wrong hands, these could turn into a catastrophe. Just then, there was a knock at the door. Standing there was a tall, dark-haired man in his 30s, clearly a stranger to our lands. He placed a black leather bag on the table and said, "Give this to Ewan." When I went inside to tell him, Ewan's face turned deathly pale, but he struggled to sit up and said, "All right, lad, I'm coming." Ewan said, "Liam, show the guest a place to sit. I'll be right there." When I returned to the parlor, I found the front door wide open. The tall, dark stranger had vanished as if he had merged into the mist, but the leather bag he brought was still on the table. I rushed outside and looked everywhere. There wasn't a footprint or a shadow. It was as if the earth had swallowed him whole. When Ewan entered the room, he asked breathlessly, "Where is the man?" "He's gone, master. He only left this bag," I replied. Ewan approached the bag, his face turning as white as chalk. As he slowly opened it, a thick, coal-black smoke rose from within. Ewan recoiled, whispering ancient Celtic prayers. "May the gods help us, Liam," he said, trembling. "This is the herald of a curse." That man was no human. He was an ancient messenger. I immediately took his arm and helped him sit on the wooden bench. "Master, what does this mean?" "No one in our village meddles with such dark arts," I said. Ewan shook his head. "Someone invited a cursed entity here last night. That entity is now hovering over Glenmore and will spread calamity to every home. I must find out who did this." As the sun began to set, Ewan emerged from his room wearing a heavy black cloak and carrying an old, leather-bound book. "Liam, my home is in your care. I must go somewhere. Do not leave the house and put this bag in a safe place. I will return before the day is out," he said, and disappeared into the fog. A voice inside told me to bolt the door. I sat by the window, watching the outside. My heart was pounding against my chest. Just then, a scream so bitter and shrill rose from the depths of the village that my blood ran cold. Hiding behind the curtain, I began to wait for whatever was about to emerge from the darkness. Despite the faith in my heart, I couldn't understand why I felt such a profound fear. Perhaps that ancient curse had already seeped into the misty streets of Glenmore. That shrill scream outside tore through the silence of the night at intervals. The streets were deserted. It was as if everyone had sensed the approaching storm and huddled by their hearths. Suddenly, I saw Ewan running toward the house. I threw the door open, and as soon as he entered, he shouted, "Close it, Liam! Bolt the door!" He collapsed onto the bench, breathless. "Master, what happened? What did you find out?" I asked. Ewan looked at me with that deep-seated fear in his eyes. "Moira and Siobhan, they have meddled in something very dark. They've laid hands on a forbidden ritual, but I don't know what it is yet. We must go to Moira's house immediately." When we reached Moira's stone cottage, the lanterns in the windows flickered strangely. Bone-chilling, guttural sounds were coming from inside. Ewan whispered, "We're too late." At that exact moment, we saw a non-human tall, pitch-black shadow move swiftly across the roof and slip down the chimney. Ewan approached the door, chanting prayers. The door creaked open on its own. The interior was pitch dark, and it felt as if 1,000 eyes were watching us. Ewan grabbed my arm and said, "We must leave. This house belongs to them now." I had just turned to leave when I heard Moira's voice. "Liam, lad, come inside. We need help." Her voice was so warm and familiar that I hesitated for a second, but Ewan shook his head sharply and pulled me back. We hurried away to Siobhan's house. Siobhan was in the garden, digging in the soil at this late hour. When she saw us, she said with a strange calmness, "Welcome, wise Ewan. Did you need something?" Once inside, Ewan's voice cracked like a whip. "Siobhan! What have you and Moira done? What ancient curse have you awakened? Tell me now, or all of Glenmore will turn to ash." Siobhan merely continued to stare at us with hollow eyes. Siobhan spoke as if nothing were wrong. "Master, surely there is a misunderstanding. I have no ties to such dark dealings." Ewan raised his voice, thundering, "You lie! I know what you and Moira have been up to. Tell me now." Siobhan turned to me. "Liam, lad, is the wise Ewan all right? Has his mind wandered?" I replied, "Just answer his questions, Siobhan." At that she said, "Fine then, let me brew some herbal tea for you," and walked into the kitchen. As soon as she left, Ewan whispered, "She's playing the fool, but I'm certain she hides something." Just then, a horrific sound from the kitchen made us jump. I cautiously approached the kitchen door, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The kitchen was plunged into total darkness, but on every corner of the walls, countless glowing eyes were watching us. There are entities here," I stammered. At that moment, invisible, ice-cold hands grabbed me by the scruff of my neck and pulled me into the darkness. I felt the chill of dozens of hands on my body, tossing me from side to side. "Ewan, help me!" I screamed. Ewan lunged forward, grabbed my arm and pulled me out. His face was ghostly pale. "We must leave now, Liam." That woman we saw wasn't Siobhan. It was a demon wearing her skin. The moment we stepped outside, the stone cottage began to shake as if caught in an earthquake. Grotesque, distorted faces appeared in the windows. Ewan's strength was failing. He leaned heavily on me as we walked. I managed to get him home and onto his bench. As I moved to get him a glass of water, the door began to be hammered violently. I opened it to find my mother, Eileen. She looked deathly afraid. "Liam, come home quickly, now!" she cried, and began to run without looking back. I turned to Ewan and said, "I have to check on her, master. I'll be right back," and plunged into the storm. Ewan didn't call back. Perhaps the howling storm had swallowed my voice. I was chasing after Eileen, but she was unnervingly agile, as if racing the wind itself. When we reached the cottage, she stopped and looked at me with eyes full of terror. "Quick, get inside, Liam. They are watching us." Before I could ask who, she bolted inside. I followed. The moment I entered, the heavy oak door slammed shut with a thunderous bang, and every lamp died at once. "Mother, what is happening?" I cried, but there was only silence. Eileen stood in the middle of the room, her back to me, still as a statue. As I placed my hand on her shoulder, an icy chill paralyzed my entire body. I couldn't even blink. That thing slowly turned toward me. Its eyes glowed with a milky white light. This was not my mother. The face was hers, but its breath smelled of rotted earth. It whispered something in an ancient, forgotten tongue. I felt sharp claws against my skin. Suddenly, it began leaping from wall to wall, snarling with animalistic movements. My knees gave out from pure terror, and I collapsed into the darkness. When I awoke, the house was empty and freezing. There was no sign of Eileen. I bolted outside and ran toward Ewan's house. Whispers were rising from every cottage in the village. When I glanced at the windows, I saw non-human entities with massive eyes watching me from behind the glass. When I reached Ewan's door, I froze. Tall figures made of shadow stood guard, their backs to me. This is my end, I thought, until Ewan's powerful voice rang out. Liam, come now. I lunged through the shadows like an arrow and sought refuge by my old friend's side. Ewan spoke in a steady voice. Do not fear, Liam. They are my guardians. I had no choice but to summon them from the ancient lands. We marched toward Moira's cottage with the shadows. Those tall, pitch-black entities stayed just a few paces behind us. Their very presence made the air turn to ice. Even though Ewan kept insisting they wouldn't harm us, walking alongside non-human forces made my soul shiver. When we reached the house, the Shadow Guardians acted first and slipped inside. The moment the door closed, a horrific sound of struggle erupted. Bodies slamming against walls, the sound of breaking bones, and the whole house trembling. After a while, the door opened on its own. Inside, the walls were covered in ancient Ogham runes, complex geometric symbols, and distorted faces that made my blood run cold. The house smelled of a heavy, damp stench, like a tomb that hadn't been opened for centuries. Ewan whispered, "Something is wrong. This darkness is far more ancient than I anticipated." We hurried to Siobhan's house. Again, the Shadow Guardians charged in first. Once the moans and screams faded, the door opened. The scene here was even more terrifying. On the main wall of the house, two massive human-like faces had appeared, with hollow eye sockets and stitched-up mouths. Between these faces, blood-red letters and numbers were carved. Worst of all, right beneath those horrific visages, the names of Connor and Saoirse were etched. Ewan turned his gaze to me, his eyes filled with dread. Ewan's single look said it all. This curse was laid upon those poor youths. Connor and Saoirse, he said. With a trembling voice, I asked, "What happens now?" "I hope we can save them," he whispered against the wind. We hurried toward the stone cottage where Connor and Saoirse lived. Ewan stopped frequently along the way, carving ancient signs into the air. Clearly the curse was taxing his old body. I was like a ghost, not even remembering how I was moving. When we reached the house, even the massive Shadow Guardians could not cross the threshold. They recoiled in fear. "This was the heart of the curse," Ewan said. "Follow me, Liam. Trust in the power of the gods," and we stepped inside. Connor and Saoirse stood frozen in the middle of the parlor. As Ewan began his ancient prayers, their faces shifted instantly, taking on a hollow and horrific expression. From their lips poured sounds that did not resemble any human. Tongue muffled and harsh, the house shook from side to side, and shadows slithered from the walls. As Ewan raised his voice, the earth trembled and the ceiling groaned. Those horrific entities grew even more furious as the master resisted them. Suddenly, Connor and Saoirse vanished like mist before our eyes. Ewan shouted, "Come, move!" We ran toward the old graveyard at the edge of the village. At the head of every gravestone stood faceless figures dressed entirely in black. They watched us in silence. Without stopping, we descended into the depths of the forest, into the heart of the darkness. In the middle of the woods, a massive bonfire was blazing. Around the fire stood strangers with expressionless faces, their eyes locked onto the flames. Beside the bonfire stood two wooden chairs. In them sat Connor and Saoirse. They wore their wedding finery, but the beautiful garments were now stained with fresh blood. The sight was horrific beyond description. Wise Ewan knelt and began whispering ancient prayers, making a final effort to stop them. The Shadow Guardians that accompanied us drove the other, indistinct entities away from the fire and back into the dark. Seeing this, Connor and Saoirse suddenly stood up. They took each other's hands and, without a moment's hesitation, flung themselves into the massive flames. The fire flared up toward the sky, and their screams echoed into the deepest hollows of the Glenmore woods. I covered my ears and clamped my eyes shut. When the screams stopped, the fire died out instantly. Everything was plunged into pitch darkness. Ewan, his shoulders slumped in defeat, whispered, "We failed, Liam. The darkness has swallowed them." When we returned to the village, all was silent. The cottages of Moira and Siobhan were dark as tombs. At Ewan's door, the old sage turned to me. "Go home, Liam. The danger has passed, but the price was heavy. Those two women, with their greed and their sorcery, have burned their children in this world and the next." When I asked why, he simply said, "I do not know, but I will have vengeance for those innocents," and closed his door. I found my mother, Eileen, awake when I reached home. "I had such terrible dreams all night, Liam. Are you all right?" she asked. I couldn't tell her what I had seen. I just said, "I'm fine, Mother," and went to my room. I lay on the bed, but my mind was a battlefield. Just as I was drifting off, I bolted upright. I felt a presence in the room, those ice-cold eyes watching the back of my neck. No one was there, but that unease was etched into my soul like a seal. I saw Eileen, my mother, preparing something in the kitchen, but I bolted out. My feet didn't feel like my own. An ancient force was pulling me toward wise Ewan's cottage. When I entered, Ewan was still sitting on that old wooden bench, leaning back. When I approached and touched his hand, I recoiled at the icy coldness. There was no pulse. My world collapsed. I fell to my knees, rested my head on his lap, and sobbed uncontrollably. It felt as if I had lost everything. I don't know how long I remained there. I was in a void. Suddenly, when I opened my eyes, I was still resting on Ewan's knees. I looked up to see his wise eyes open, looking at me with a gentle smile. "Master, you're alive," was all I could gasp. Ewan said, "Yes, lad, be calm. You've been here since last night. You fell asleep right at my feet." I was confused, thinking I had gone home, but he comforted me. "No, Liam, you were here." Then, he took a deep breath and revealed the dark truth. Moira and Siobhan repeated the same horrific mistake their husbands made years ago. Their husbands had made a pact with ancient, dark spirits to gain wealth, cursing themselves and their bloodline. Every move they made to escape this plight only deepened the mire. Eventually, they saw suicide as their only escape. But the curse did not sleep. Moira and Siobhan, under the guise of protecting their children, turned to the same dark arts and sealed the fates of Connor and Saoirse with their own hands. Some entities will not stop until they take what they want, Liam. They will make life a living hell. This is why we must never stray from the path of the ancient light. What I heard shook my very soul. The people of Glenmore sensed what had happened, yet no one uttered a single word. The story of Connor and Saoirse remained a secret to be kept forever among the misty hills.